innovation is part of the evolution. So if you think about it in that way, and we said it changed your organization in response to changing elements in your environment, that probably gives you the answer. It's like it's almost asking, what happened to those who couldn't adapt or evolve? I think you become less relevant. You lose a lot of the advantages. You are unable to deal with some of the limitations that the changing environment has introduced to you. And absolutely, I mean, it's almost you refuse to engage, or it's almost like you refuse to acknowledge the change around you, because if you do, you are going to change, and you are going to have to innovate.
So change or be changed.
Change or be changed, or become irrelevant, like where people stop caring even whether you change or you don't change, because you are not relevant to the environment. You become less relevant with time, and then so I think that's probably the biggest probably answer to your questions. Like if the world around you is changing, and your customers are changing, your stakeholders are changing, your people are changing, and then you are not the model you introduce, or the answer you introduce, becomes less adequate, less effective, less relevant. I think, yes, I mean,
to cope with this change around you,
you become obsolete is the answer. You do become obsolete. I mean, it's a matter of time. There's no question. There's no question about it. And therefore, I think part of it you could add to discussions like you innovate to adapt, you innovate to continue to be relevant, you innovate to continue to survive, and hopefully even improve your competitive positioning in the market and so on. It's pretty much a process, an evolution process, the way you describe it, بالتأكيد. And I think, Kaman, it's a loop. It's a positive feedback cycle. The more you innovate, and the more there are experimentation and going on, and the more there is this thinking process that is pushing everyone to a new state, the more that gives you that data and ideas to innovate more, and it becomes a positive feedback cycle. The more that slows down and you stop adapting, the less resources and the less capability, the less muscle you have to actually continue to evolve. The world will continue to change, and the gap continues to widen, and this is what eventually makes you, I think, obsolete. And probably that's one of the things that لما حكينا عن موضوع الكرياتيفيتي وحكينا عن موضوع حتى الريسيرش وحكينا عن موضوع الانفنشن.
Yes.
I think innovation can feed on that بالتأكيد, لأنه it's that new invention that introduces either a new tool that you can use, or introduces a new limitation in your existing business model, or your ability to compete. So they are two different things, but they definitely feed into each other. That's another loop that, the feedback sort of cycle that we talked about, because a lot of the stuff that you and I are innovating around is the necessity to innovate around or to find an answer coming because of some of the technical achievements or scientific achievements that were not there in the first place 20-30 years ago. We didn't even, we were not even conscious of that question, of the possibility of that question. We never were confronted with it. We never had to answer it. And now we have to do, because this exists, because this has happened, that invention or that.
So يعني بلشنا عرفنا الانوفيشن. قلنا الانوفيشن هي التجديد, the novelty of a new idea. It can be a technology, can be a business model, can be a process, can be the way you approach your clients, your marketing, كل هالكلام بحيث انه يخلق التجديد هاي again to make you relevant. And بعدين حكينا عن أهمية الانوفيشن اللي هو if you don't innovate أنت ربطها بالsurvival. يعني genuinely if you don't innovate you become irrelevant, meaning you might just wither and become يعني you exit. يعني دائما لما نسمع عن الانوفيشن نسمع عن ابل، اوبر، تسلا وهيك. ولما نسمع عن الناس اللي فشلوا في الانوفيشن، ناس زي نوكيا، ناس زي كوداك، ناس زي بلاك بيري. فكيف شو بنظرك هدول الاثنين كانوا يعني هل حقيقي انه كوداك مثلا they didn't innovate؟
Very interesting question. I think it's a very well documented sort of case studies. I think people find different answers بالآخر إنه ليه إنه did they do invention, they came up with something. A lot of them tell you إنه there were those ideas of innovation and they were shut down simply because there was no that sense of urgency within the organization to go and rock the boat and so on. So yeah.
So أنت يعني ربطنا الريسيرش وربطنا الانفنشن بالانوفيشن which is rightfully so. It's a prerequisite صح؟
But also changes in our environment. يعني أنت اليوم إذا بتشوف a lot of the innovation is happening in climate change. طيب my climate change 100 years ago we're not talking about that.
صح.
Okay. So now we're talking about innovation in climate change. Now we're talking about innovation in sustainability.
صح.
Okay. The environment now is confronting us with those very difficult questions that are saying this is a very severe sort of form of disruption to our world, and how are we going to innovate around that? Because it is a survival, like to your point, not in hypothetical terms. It's actually it's a real survival issue. On the other end, لما بنحكي عن technological sort of invention and research and all that, عم نحكي اليوم كمان عن innovation around cloud and around AI. Artificial intelligence. We are going to innovate around artificial intelligence. Out of that, call it scientific breakthrough, progress in research and something around AI that is confronting us with a totally different list of assumptions about our world, about the opportunities and the size of it and the approach around even the limitations, what's going to be the limitation under that. Totally different map of what is the limitation in this scenario and what is the cost in this scenario and what is the opportunity in this scenario. And now we're going to have to scramble and find our way with a totally different set of mindset or ideas and innovation.
يعني لو أخذناها من from an economic market perspective, market responds automatically to innovation in a way that if people or buyers find two products, if one product matches their need أكتر من الثاني, people automatically will go to this product and they will render the other product obsolete and market will stabilize automatically وخلص والناس بتمشي. That's why Nokia ناس كانت تحبها, طلعت Apple, they innovated. ناس شافوا إنه Apple as a product is higher quality, matches their requirements better. They shifted from Nokia to Apple, and then Nokia did not innovate at the same speed زي ما حكيت as the change, and therefore they slowed down and they became obsolete and irrelevant زي ما حكيت. From an economic perspective, innovation أهميته إنه if you don't pay attention with focus and deliberation to what's happening in the market, then you get left behind.
Correct. What you are suggesting is that there is a sensory function within individual organizations that
at an organization level.
At an organization level that needs to keep absolutely. يعني بالexample اللي أنت حكيته على Nokia versus an Apple and so there are so many explanations that could lead you to that outcome. One of them is that iPhone probably even technically wasn't feasible, if it's not possible, wasn't feasible 2 decades ago with the technology that was available back then. انت اليوم لما بتحكي عن الانوفيشن اللي صار ب location based services or enabled زي
Google Maps,
Uber ولا Google Maps. ما هو that started from internet and connectivity becoming wireless and becoming completely pervasive, blanket, required some progress in satellite technology, مش بس scientifically, even commercially, that it became actually feasible to use something like that was only used for defense at some stage. Now it's very feasible for consumer. You're talking about network effects that creates the economies of networks between drivers and between riders and between, so required the whole market someone to talk about an app store where you can actually load something and require probably breakthrough in cybersecurity, require breakthrough in how we scan the cities we live in, required a lot. And all that was going, and it didn't happen
زي ما قلت
the week before that. So yes, someone actually saw an opportunity and was sensing, and there must have been a muscle within the organization to continue to play with those concepts and get to the point where we're saying there is an opportunity probably that no one else has identified, or there is a limitation that people lived with long enough, and we believe that some of the assumptions around that limitation are obsolete, and they are not true anymore. And here comes a different model that we believe subscribes or better describe the world we live in, and that negotiation between opportunities and constraints. And here is a suggestion. Here is my take on it, and let's see how it works.
طب شو رأيك باللي عنده perception إنه ما في constraints؟ يعني they're so much ingrained جوا ال comfort zone تبعه بحيث إنه they cannot see the constraints, they cannot see the challenges. مش عم بيشوفوا التسونامي اللي جاي من بعيد، and لما تيجي it's too late. كيف هدول يعني شو رأيك فيهم؟
I think
يعني أساساً to contextualize the question, do you think Nokia had that? لأنه أبل أول ما طلعت the phone was so backward، ما كان في بلوتوث، ما كان في أب ستور، ما كان في أي شيء. at a Nokia level إذا حناخدها as a case study، أبل ما كانت مسكرة. يعني they announced إنه راح يكون في آيفون، إذا announced إنه الآيفون features راح تكون screen، راح تكون they had at least 2-3 years of initial market response and test, and yet ما قدروا يلحقوهم. مع انه يعني نوكيا كانت الكاميرات احسن، كانت البروسيسورز احسن، كان في اب ستور للنوكيا، and yet they were not able to see even the constraints زي ما تفضلت let alone respond to it. فهل في خطورة إنه الواحد يكون يعني blind، يعني الconstraint في blind spot؟
I think so. I think كمان يعني بالexample اللي أنت described, it's not even I think about not seeing the constraint. It's actually being probably content with your definition of the opportunity, and someone else saw a much bigger opportunity, but to realize that opportunity there are certain limitations in the current system. Let's change them. Yani, if you don't want to grow, I think probably in that world your world is much less constrained, simply because you are not really pushing the boundaries.
But is it إنه ما بدهم to grow؟ معقول؟ يمكن they want to grow but they're rejecting maybe. لأنه زي ما قلت إنه there is an element of unlearning, and that's
يعني I don't know هلا عم تحكي بexample كتير specific، بس maybe one of them is carrying their device, and that's the limit of the vision of what they see the role of that device is going to do. And someone else actually thought, no, actually this is going to replace everything. Everyone is going to carry one. You're going to do everything with it. You're going to play and work and learn on it and do everything, and that starts introducing some technical limitation. The screen is too small, the keyboard is too awkward, but it requires internet to be connected to it, and it's like you start actually creating a much bigger system that starts now you start going to the frontiers where there are new meaningful limitations of why can't you have these things in one device, and it's this big. And so I think it's hunger as well, and it's حكينا عن different elements. So there is the sensory within what's going on that might affect the assumptions of limitation that you have, but it's also about that vision of what is it that you are doing, what is your value, what is the value that, and how can that value grow, and under that bolder vision that you have, what are the limitations to getting to that, not to what we're delivering today. those current limitations we overcome already.
صح
We are
صح.
here.
ما يعني بعدين بيجي ال philosophical question of you don't know what you don't know. if you don't know what you don't know, if you don't have a process that brings your unconscious incompetence or the unconscious elements of your business to the conscious, and that's the innovation process. في concept مرة قرأته في كتاب عن ال obstacles to innovation in large corporates, وانت خبرتك معظمها في large corporates, which is the moment you introduce change, automatically corporate antibodies starts forming, and these corporate antibodies, very rightfully so sometimes, يعني معظم الأحيان بيكون it's a resource competition, sometimes بتكون it's priorities, sometimes بيكون strategic misalignment. But those corporate antibodies, the ones that actually reject the voices of the innovation within the organization, are the ones that usually are blamed for failure later on. يعني it's in hindsight كل شيء سهل. يعني هلا اي حدا يطلع يقول كان المفروض مثلا كوداك هم اللي اخترعوا ديجيتال كاميراز في السبعينات، ومع هيك هم اللي يعني ديجيتال كاميرا is the one that put them out of business. But it's easier to say it now لانه سهل تطلع عليه الورا.
It's the innovator's dilemma.
Yes disruptive.
So it's the innovator's dilemma بالتأكيد. هلا انت in large organizations, when you start talking about scale, you do build certain systems for predictability and for efficiency and for optimization and for on. So it's not always that those same structures are also designed for innovation. If you think about government, government is actually about
processes,
predictability, reliability, consistency, and so on. So how do you create from within that structure without actually shaking those very true values, valuable
structure
values that are very important? How do you, and I think there are models of how you work around that. And if you think about, we live in the UAE, and I think the government here is one of the most innovative organizations or governments around the world, and they found a formula of how you could
sweet spot,
how you could do both, and how do you inject that certain innovation, and how do you institutionalize that innovation so you can continue to do that. So I think traditionally it's been difficult, so our large corporates or governments, but it's not impossible. I think we see very good examples of how this is happening. Well, I think إذا حكينا إنه it is a response to the change in the environment or the constraints around that, I think you start seeing some of the elements that help with that in the organization. حكيت أنت on those islands sometimes of change in the organization. That brings you the things around exposure, so the sensory information, like how you don't become too inward looking and be outward looking as well. The outward mindset is also a well-documented sort of concept.
Yes.
There is the bit around the necessary positive friction.
Yes.
Inside the organization.
Okay.
يعني بالعربي تضرب بعض الرأي ببعض. يعني عرفت علي? To collide ideas and see what comes out of it. That's very important, and that is less likely to happen if there is no diversity in the backgrounds or in the teams that are actually involved, the stakeholders. You need to bring diversity, not only in the traditional terms, but in the backgrounds of where people come from. It's also well documented that even innovation labs that have various disciplines within their teams usually come up with more innovative ideas rather than the very long-term scientific research breakthrough, for example. So they can come up with some interesting usage of what they have and how they maneuver around the constraints and the opportunities and so on. I think all that is important. That's also something that you touched on اللي هي بحكي عن موضوع growth mindset.
Yes.
Growth mindset, not only in the sense it's like, do you want to grow or not? It's also about I don't know how to call it.
Education, maybe?
Having the confidence in trying something new and failing as part of a learning process. Embracing rather than an indication of your worth or the lack of it. That's a very different mindset. So when you try something and it doesn't work, how do you, even as an organization, not looking on, it's like the growth mindset, there's a book around it, and it probably focuses more on individuals. I think the same applies on that organic being
أكيد.
called an organization or a corporate. It's like, do you have that growth mindset? Are we really trying to push boundaries? And when you are at that edge, you cannot assume that every hypothesis that you come up with is going to work exactly as you envisioned it, and every experiment you go with is like, do you see your work as an experiment? You know, because if your strategy is a hypothesis, then what you are engaging in is an experiment.
It's testing of this hypothesis.
And it's testing. And then if you test that hypothesis, you hope that you are going to win more than, or to be correct more than you're going to be wrong. But it's a very different framing of what is it that we are trying. And it's a very different framing of what's success and what's failure. So sometimes, like, I talk to people and say, we're running that experiment, we're trying this. There is the concept of failure and success in the sense of, did things work exactly as we thought they would? Okay, and in that, if that's the case, our hypotheses are correct, and we found something, and we need now to tune it and continue and scale it. But there is also the concept of, if it didn't work as expected, I don't know how to explain. It's not like the experiment has failed. The experiment gave you the output, was designed, or it answered the question it was designed to answer.
Exactly.
Okay, it didn't fail. The only way, when I talk to sometimes about the people, it's like, when would it fail? Would it fail when there was no discipline in how we experimented, or when we applied our strategy, or when we applied our experiment, to the extent that with the outcome in hand, I can't extract useful information. I don't know. We did not follow the line of the experiment that we've agreed on, and we didn't isolate variables, and it was all over the place.
Oh wow, okay.
And I don't know what is it that didn't work. That probably for me is a more accurate definition of failing within an experiment, because I don't know what to do with it now. It's like, okay, we put that time, we put that resources. Am I able to extract any useful knowledge from it? Did it increase my chances on me having a more accurate or a better result next time around? We didn't follow the strategy. And that's a very interesting concept, because now you start talking about that friction, or that collision between discipline and autonomy.
Yes.
It's very interesting. And that's why I don't think it's a mechanical process. You don't put innovation variables in an Excel sheet and something happens. And there is that. If it's an experiment, you need a little bit of discipline.
زي ما حكيت, variables isolated and then playing around.
Exactly, to say, this is what we're going to do, and if we do this, this is what's going to happen. And if it doesn't come out that way, I can think about what is it that I want to change. But
to actually use those failures
exactly, because we follow the strategy, we followed an experiment. There is a line to that experiment, and we know it's like, if we don't follow it, I don't know how to read the outcome. But at the same time, how do you get people to the point where they are moving with you in the same direction, to engage, and they understand that? This is where you start thinking about another concept, in my opinion, which is, especially in large corporates, one of the things that you probably give to people to increase the chances of them trying and innovating is giving them the North Star of where we want to go, because that frames the relevant innovation versus a very isolated, disconnected attempt at something that is not even relevant to where we are going. It's not useful. And that, I think, is where you start balancing those two: the autonomy that is required by innovation, but also the proper framing, or what I call the organizational discipline of what we are doing together as a team. So part of that is that you need to have a vision. And you need to have vision to say, this is what we are going towards, and here is the limitation, whether in terms of scalability or skills to our model. And that's where the important role that each one of you as functions and individuals are going to help us play with. And this is what I'm looking for. And that what if you're lucky, what this happens, I mean, if you're successful, what that triggers is layers of experimentation, because there is several experiments within every experiment.
Okay.
There are several stories within every story. There's the story of the organization that did this, moved from here to there. But each one of those functions are actually needs to have a little bit of autonomy to see their own story within their own scope of what is it that I'm trying to do. I'm innovating in sales. I'm innovating in channel. I'm innovating in technology. I'm innovating in customer service. I know why is this important, which variables or which limitations I'm going to be hit with in the new model that we are moving. Those constraints are going to become more important to overcome. And they can almost write their own sub-story within the big story.
From their own experiments.
From their own experience, from their own scope, about what is it that they innovated with. And this is, I think, if you find that balance of telling people there are certain level of innovation that is happening at every person's level, at every function's level.
Yeah.
But it's not in vacuum. There is an overall agenda and North Star vision that we are all going towards, and that helps you prioritize
your efforts, your resources,
efforts, and the answers you are trying the questions you are trying to answer, or the usefulness of your contribution, because we are going to push it. It gives you a frame of relevance to your efforts at a functional, at individual level. And I think that's a very interesting sort of balance to hold between this is where we are going, and there shouldn't be too many competing. There comes a time where we brainstorm and come together and differ in opinion and
ideas
and negotiate.
Yes.
And negotiate.
This is where negotiation is.
And negotiate and I understand the operational implications or the functional implications.
And how does it align with the vision?
How does it align or not? And then sometimes I am going to tune it based on your feedback, and we all together tune it, because I'm trying to accommodate that. And there are certain things where you just it's the reason behind it is too strategic to be changed because of an operational implication. We want you to deal with it. That becomes part of the limitation of our environment under that vision.
Yeah.
And so. But once that's done, somehow, if it's done, as like I don't think as well strategy is a fixed sort of thing. You do it once, but not all aspect of it is as fast moving. Some of it needs to be a little bit stable over a period of time. So we give that framing for the different contribution of different functions to work on that worthy goal or purpose. And then those becomes the stuff where we are less busy negotiating, and it can't be too long, because otherwise we go into the trap of what you said. If that model continues to be with us for 15, 20 years, the whole world around us has changed. That's why I'm saying it's not a variable that doesn't move, but it's slower moving. It's layers again of stuff that this is slower moving. The ones underneath, as they get operational, far more faster moving, and we are far less jealous about. And you are going to give us an answer that completely negates some of our assumptions, and this doesn't matter because you are pushing in the same direction. You solve the problem, and that's your story. That's your success story of how you worked around that problem. And there are 20 like those, and together we create a much bigger story.
واو اوكي سو عندنا احنا الريسيرش الانفنشن الانوفيشن مربوطين في بروسيس وهلا انت يعني you summarize the process in the sense of we have a vision and then there's an autonomy but at the same time there's structure. We give people the autonomy but we give them the North Star, we give them the facilities to try, hypothesize, test and then it's always a success, because whether you proved your hypothesis, that's good and well. If you didn't, عندك variables, you change a little bit and then try another time.
Which is not sorry if I can, which is not always in many corporations is natural. So I'll give you some things. Like sometimes we present to our people to say, listen, here is our strategy, here are the initiatives that we are going through, and so on. And I sometimes call it in various corporations that I work, like we call it reverse accountability as well, because it's not only your people who are accountable.
Okay.
So we are accountable to them to say,
as leadership,
have we done what we said we're going to do? Have we made their life easier? Have we really paid attention and put directed resources to the priorities we declared as priorities? Are we doing our job? Before I ask you to do yours. But one of the things when we present to those people, it's like I usually see if the dashboard is all green, there's something wrong. It's like I grow fishy, so suspicious. Like, and you can sympathize, you can understand sometimes why people would do that. I think I've been blessed in working with so many people that I reported to and report to me who are not afraid of that. So we do show when it's red, and that red can be sometimes we overstretched and we couldn't allocate attention to that. Parked, it didn't fail, it didn't like we didn't do it, and that's a lesson of how far can we really carry as a priority.
You touched the threshold and now you adjust and calibrate.
And exactly, we took more than we should have went with a smaller set, and somehow they prioritized themselves based on the daily nags and the sort of the organization. Sometimes it's like we tried it didn't work, because this is what we've learned, because we found out that this has happened, or by the time we are executing this, something else changed in our environment that just made this not the right answer. Now we're going to take two, and that's very important. That's very important because it's a very important message, those signals to say we're not going to succeed in everything we are doing. And the other concept I think that probably goes to structure and innovation is that I usually, it's like think of strategy as what is it that you are not going to do, because if you start doing strategy by addition, it becomes not a strategy, it becomes a collection of good ideas, of nice ideas, of it's like that's not a strategy, and that's not a North Star, and that's becomes
too safe.
Too safe, maybe, in the sense that I've thought about that, and I didn't leave something
risky.
that I didn't try to do. Or if it's a top down, there are 120 sort of metrics in a dashboard, you didn't want to leave any of them. But the severe sort of scenario of that is that you don't have a strategy, because all those variables, all those metrics somehow start becoming equal in weight, but some of them, as we know, probably oppose or are competing for attention, competing for resources. You need to make up your mind.
You have to have measures. You have to have
a position. You can't be on the fence. They can't be all equal for you in the situation, in the phase you are in. So and once you clarify those, that starts giving people the structure about, okay, what's the sense of urgency, where we need to change, where do we need to move. And then beyond that, yes, I understand the mission, I actually have better autonomy. So I think the alignment around the strategy and vision is a very important driver for innovation, because what I find out is at that level, if you have a very strong view of where you need to go and under what model, and this is what's going to happen, the different functions are looking at this and different people engage. If you are lucky, like myself, and you have diverse people of different backgrounds who's looking at this, they're going to come up with better answers to how this can be done. It's their job. They are better they're better than
problem
you
solvers
at marketing or at comms or at
طبيعي
technical
صح.
sales or at sales, or it's like they are, and that clarity is going to give them a time more a much better way to judge on opportunities as they introduce themselves, to say, here's a great opportunity for me to serve that strategy. So the surface of the sensory sort of thing becomes much bigger,
صح.
because you can't be the one who's judging on all those
الريسبتورز
opportunities.
بصيروا اكبر بكثير
بصيروا
وبتقدر
أكبر
تشوف
بكتير, and
and
they
you pay
understand
attention.
what's important. They have a model because of that priority of how to weigh priorities and weigh opportunities, and whether this is an opportunity that is aligned or not. And they are going to come up with much better opportunities than you can scale to, and they can come up with much better answers to some of the day-to-day questions and even some of the strategic questions within their scope and their function. That's what you want. That's what you want. And that starts creating their own claim to success, their own success stories, their own innovation, their own... You want to create that, and you want to have that balance.
حكيت عن الأوتونومي، حكيت عن السايكولوجيكال سيفتي بشكل عام، إنه يكون الفريكشن محبوبة مش frowned upon.
صح.
حكيت عن إنه give people، يعني أعطي الخبز للخباز. واحد في marketing، واحد في operations، واحد في sales، واحد on the ground touching base with the clients day in day out. فأكيد عنده views that probably someone in corporate sitting in high tower ما عنده نفس ال concerns or نفس ال comments or نفس ال feedback or ideas. What stops organizations from actually doing that? Doing this innovation, doing this hypothesization, doing إنهم to accept and accelerate failure, let's say, as a means of learning. What makes corporates... يعني الحكي اللي حكينا يعني it's easier said than done. ولو إنه بالسهولة تاعت الحكي كان كل حدا عملها، كان نوكيا ما فشلت، كان كوداك ما فشلت، كان بلاكبيري ما فشلت. And yet there's an element of failure that goes beyond everything we said. شو برأيك؟
I think some of the more psychological sort of reasons, simpler reasons, إذا كنا بنحكي عن individuals, which I think is changing. بس in our age, we went through a very, for example, education system that I don't think necessarily instills confidence in our ability to be innovative. The source of information and wisdom was one direction. It wasn't about critical thinking. It wasn't about challenging. It wasn't about that. I think with that, your measure of your success in school system, at least وقتي أنا, it's like that, was about how good are you in applying some of the principles and concepts that I'm giving you. It's not about you coming up with your own.
You were a vessel. تتعبى معلومات. يلا سمع.
Yeah, and show me even like in the best, like this is the concept, this is what I'm wrong. Here's a situation that this, that applies to this, where you can apply this concept. Show me how good are you in applying that concept to this to come up with an answer that follows that line of thinking and so on. I think what does that do is like at the simplest level, I think, is that you have less opportunities, I call it, to catch yourself doing a good thing or doing an innovative thing that starts building your confidence that I am capable of.
The muscle اللي حكيت عنها.
The muscle of I am capable of critical thinking. I can come up with genuine ideas. I can, and I know that this is probably changing. I can see that this is changing. The education system that our kids are going through is very different than the one we have done. So I think that's probably generationally has contributed to this, to the lack of innovation. I think there is also a conception اللي حكينا عنه. Innovation is not something I do. It's not within my job. Someone in the organization is doing innovation. It's almost like there is a department for innovation. So it's the opposite of everything that you and I have discussed until now. about that it's an organic process, everyone involved gets
اجت
involved
فترة
in it.
كانوا بدهم يعملوا innovation departments وفي عندك CIO Chief Innovation Officer and then a team of innovators and كذا وبعدين the whole thing is just dismantled.
Correct, which is the idea. It's like if you wanna give it due credit, the Chief Innovation Officer isn't the person who's going to do the innovation. That wasn't, I don't think anyone claimed this to be the case when they created this. Like it's probably to have the discussion that we were having. It's the Chief Innovation Officer is the person who's going to try and help us facilitate the innovation process within the organization, embedded and inject that that way of thinking in everyone in the organization, create a setup or an atmosphere or a culture that fosters innovation and takes out a lot of the barriers of the innovation,
increase the senses,
create the sensory, and absolutely create partnerships outside that organization. So some of those experiments are not going to be crushed by the machine, which is designed for for predictability and for efficiency and being optimized, doing a lot of those things to foster innovation at the edge and at the core of an organization, rather than become the sole person who's responsible for every innovative idea. That's not doable. That's not going to happen. So I think that's probably what it's to the Chief is supposed to model with the same questions you and I has, like where do we set the balancing act of giving a clear vision, discipline in the direction, autonomy in the execution and the experimentation. How do we measure people on things? So I'll give you an example, like which goes back to the question, why aren't we doing more of this? What inhibits this? You hear in some organizations, a lot of leaders even pride themselves, I measure on results.
Yes.
I measure on results. I don't care about efforts. It's like, I'm not sure I completely agree with that with that notion, probably to its extreme. لأنه no, you want people to be putting some real effort and well thought effort. Now, if the results are consistently not the right results, you would question that this is the right effort. It's not the right effort, then there's something going on. But sometimes it's outside the control. Sometimes it's because of something internally within the organization. I think recognizing effort, because effort for me also relates to that experimentation we were talking about.
Yes.
It's about the experiment not running the way we thought it will.
So you go back and see the method.
And you see, but it was disciplined. We did what we've agreed we are going to do, and so on. So all that goes into the effort bucket rather than just the result. So you need just to redefine, or you reframe, is that the result isn't only about getting the numbers, like it's also about the learning that came from that experiment. You need to somehow either redefine what failure is, or redefine what effort is, or redefine what results is. The way I think it's used today, or people refer to it, can be a little bit of abused and doesn't work towards that innovation. I'm not saying it's not important what results its actual results is also what we need to show to continue the experiment.
So we continue
to survive and to allocate more resources, so we can become more competitive, or we can become more sophisticated in our model. We start running better and more, and more bold experiments. We become more sophisticated in our thinking about those experiments and so on. So I'm not for a minute suggesting that results are not important, but it's definitely part of this, is that if you start isolating innovation in one department and everyone else is about results, it's not about effort, it's not about experimentation, it's not about innovation, I don't think you serve the purpose of that organization. I think that's a very important point to your question.
وبتخلق كمان يعني على قولتك السوفت element اللي هي الكالتشر، بتخلق نوع من انواع الغيره بين التيمز. يعني اشمعنى هدوك التيمز مثلا they're allowed to they have an open check and they are allowed to fail because they're an innovation team, وإحنا هنا we're judged by results only. There has to be a striking a balance.
Yeah, we are the cool, we are the strategic, you guys are the operational.
يعني يعني jealousy في التيم نفسه, it's not healthy.
It's that, and I think in my experience
Yeah.
over the past several years, if you give people that mandate to say, I want results, but I also want that experimentation, I want that push of the envelope, I think part of it is that you are taking those people more seriously, and they feel more encouraged by that role. It's a far better role, far more interesting role to say, I know it's difficult to juggle, but I think we're going to have to do that. In my opinion, you are rewriting the job description of that person to say, who told you is the job is that you get the weekly number or the monthly number. You are also building new models by which a year, 2 years from now, we are going to be in a very different place. That's part of your job, by the way. That's a far more exciting job or a mission to accept. So there are various advantages for why you create that balance of autonomy and vision, and why you tell people, no, you do wear multiple hats as a leader.
Yeah.
It's not, you're not going to sit neatly within your function, follow orders, and just do as you are told. You know, we need different type of leaders who see excitement in that the complexity of that compound mission. Another aspect, by the way, about how do you judge success and failure and so on is very important, is that if you start talking only about the immediate results and so on, and it's not about the efforts and what's coming and so on, I think you need to ask your question about how much of that success is one-off and short-term versus institutionalized.
And sustainable. Yeah. So.
And sustainable, because yes,
how do you measure that?
It's very difficult. I mean, you can give me short-term results.
Yeah.
But you could argue there is a chance that this starts eroding slowly as we progress, because we're not really changing anything. We're not trying to reimagine the next level of sophistication. Because it's convenient. We're getting the results. Why would I? So I think that goes back to some of the examples that you've used. So I think that's again a way to rethink about the role of a leader, even at an operational level. Is your job only to get me the short-term results, or is your job to institutionalize capabilities, increase the level of sophistication within your scope, within your function, and the overall team that institutionalizes that engine of success? That engine continues to be innovated in, continues to be tuned, and will give me a more sustainable engine for success, a longer prospect of healthy business over time. That needs to become part of the job. But that's a very, very different mentality, because then you can integrate within it the concept of a hypothesis and the strategy, the concept of autonomy and the stories, the concept of failure, the concept of experimentation.
Yes.
Because now you just added a framework of what is worthy, and you've added the framework of what is acceptable as an autonomy, because now it's part of the job. It's almost like, if I don't push in that, I'm not doing my job. That's a very different probably angle to how to do that. And I'm not assuming, for those who work in corporates, that they will know that this is much easier said than done. But I have seen a lot of cases when it is doable. It's not either or. It's not either the short-term success or
it can be both,
or compromise the results for the sake of longer-term success. But you can run out of fuel very quickly. It can be both. So both is actually, it's like, from what we thought about, it almost comes down to a conviction. It's not only can be both. There's no other way.
There's no other way. لأنه هاي هي innovation.
There's no other way.
Innovation is about sustainability and survival.
There is no other way. It's like, do you want to cash out on whatever and capitalize and utilize whatever you have for the next 2 years, and it doesn't matter whether you continue to be capable afterwards
Or relevant.
or relevant, or it's like it's in in business books they talk about production versus production capabilities.
Yes,
It's how do you invest in those? You continue to produce, but you continue to invest in the capabilities to produce, and innovation is absolutely part of it.
So يعني حكيت عن leaders, which is very very important concept when it comes to innovation, لأن هم اللي يعني they instill all of the values اللي حكيت فيها within the workforce, especially على level تبع الculture, but also giving people the North Star and giving them this vision that they have to follow or aim for and align with. القصة اللي دائما بتخطر في بالي لما أسمع هاي الأفكار، قصة السي او تبع IBM في الستينات والسبعينات، لما واحد من الموظفين عنده خسر مشروع بملايين الدولارات، فالسي او طلبه عنده على المكتب، قال له تعال بدي أشوفك. فالموظف مفكر إنه خلص راح يتفنش، يعني he's gonna be fired because of the millions that he lost. فأول ما وصل الموظف he was proactive, he said this is my resignation, I'm sorry for what happened. CEO طلع فيه قال له are you crazy, I just spent $1 million training you.
Yeah.
The concept of leaders and the environment that they instill within the workforce to embrace failure, not as a failure, but as a learning opportunity, and then go back and re-experiment changing few other variables. But عشان تقدر تعمل هالكلام from the get-go لازم يكون عندك كل هالvariables موجودين. Approach it زي ما تفضلت as a hypothesis, as a scientific experiment, and now let's do this. Okay, this is a learning, it's not a failure, let's change again and then do that. And then so on and so forth. بس طبعا لازم يكون في threshold بحيث انه risks او failures ما تكون existential فبتأثر على التوب لاين. شو رأيك في القصة هاي؟
Absolutely. I think if you السيناريو اللي انت you describe, not only the story but your take on it, your reflection on it is very useful in the sense that you create a little bit of مش disconnection وإنما distance between you and the experiment.
Yes.
Yeah, this has been succeeding or failing. You are definitely part of that, but it's not you who's a failure.
Interesting.
Not everyone who's who tried the hypothesis and went and experimented with something has failed. Is a failure simply because that failed. So the disconnection, especially if we go back to the concept that it's a group sport, it's a joint experiment at some level. We're gonna try this. This has worked. This hasn't worked, and we're gonna go back to the drawing board. We're gonna tune it a little bit, so it allows for that healthy distance between the different experiments that you are running, because you are also rarely running one experiment. You are pushing on different dimensions. Some of them goes back to the dashboard.
Yes.
Green, yellow, red. Okay, so there is that useful, I think, of a little bit of a healthy distance from myself and that experiments, that mentality that you described. Provide that healthy way of looking at it, or not always internalize
the failure.
And identification with it, and so on.
It's very important.
It just becomes a little bit more of a manageable sort of thing. That's the name of the game. It's a very different game than the one that's in a nutshell what the growth mindset is about. I've just trained. You've just received $1 million training. I'll tell you. I'll tell you a story from my side. My version of that story.
Okay.
I was, I come from a consulting background. Deep inside, I think part of me will always be a consultant. I was given the chance to run a sizable operation.
Okay,
which is not very common within how the organ. So someone took a risk and said, the phase we are in, the challenge we need to meet, isn't about organic growth, isn't about someone who's so internal to the process. It's about someone who might come with a fresh perspective to give us that push. Because we were struggling, sort of like we continue to grow, we continue to be an amazing competitive position, but the rate of growth cannot be sustained. It needed a shock. It needed another tool to be created to try. So I took the job. It was one of the best decisions that I've made. I took the job. I think we've done very well, especially in the first year. In the first year, things were working. The organization was mature, or I thought so. There are no cracks and so on. My boss that hired me leaves for another job. I get someone else whom I'm learning from a lot. So we are about to start our first year together. And it was a very tough year. Something happened in our environment. The cracks in the organization started showing. It was like a very different place all of a sudden.
Oh, wow.
And that's my first entry point. So I'm just starting now with my new boss. And they were supportive. They were supportive in the sense that I think you can do it. I think deep inside you even know what needs to be done. And I want you to do that. But a very encouraging sort of conversation in coaching I'll never forget came from even the higher boss. So I had a skip level meeting and I was having that conversation. And that person is very senior in the organization, knew exactly what was going on. Knew exactly what was going on. So he asks me, so how's it going? I said, it's a very rough ride and a new learning curve for me. And you could see the smile on his face. He said, great, I'm happy. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Listen, I'm a hero this year. I'm doing so well. Last year was extremely tough. Okay, I wasn't doing well. He's talking about himself. He said, we think you have what it takes. You're going to play this role and you're going to play bigger roles. I want you to have one of those years under your belt.
Wow.
Every leader needs to go through one of those.
That's profound.
Yeah. Because now I know you have the experience of, by the time you are done with that year, I know that you've seen one of those rough storms. You rode the wave. You did what you could. You didn't break the boat. And the sun is going to come out. And just do what you have to do. Deep inside, you know it. Just go for it. Do it. And because this is going to end. And you're going to come out of it with that experience under your belt, which gives me great confidence of what else you could do.
The future.
Yeah. So it was a very similar sort of story saying, okay, good. We collectively as an organization, we want you to go through one of those. It's not real. It's unreal if you haven't seen. It's like, it's like you haven't been hardened by battle before. You need to be hardened by combat. It's like now you have.
You have to have the scar tissues.
You need to have combat experience, and you have. And luckily enough, I had to do what I had to do. Or what I needed was time and space and that sort of support. And I think gave me great experience and confidence to face something like this again. And I have. And I think gave the people around you, that ecosystem, much more confidence in you. It's like, no, listen, it's like, he's not going to be lost by another one of those. They're not going to get overwhelmed by something like that. They will still know, take this for what it is. It's a phase that requires innovation,
of course,
to address that so we can come out of it in a much better shape. And that was the language I gave to my people. I said, there is an opportunity. We have a window of opportunity to use that time to rebuild for something. And when we come out of it, our operational excellence, our level of sophistication is going to be at a very different level. I started in future, team meetings also reflecting on that. I said, it wasn't a great year in results, but here is all what we've done.
Wow.
Okay. Because that goes then to that effort that you talk about. We were building for the future. It was very windy, but here's what we've done. We created all those growth mechanisms, which are very transformational. We established a different management system that ensures that we are able to manage the business differently. We created different capabilities. We redefined our roles to ensure that we don't fall in the same mistakes again. We did this, we did that, we established this, we institutionalized that, and now in a very better. And by the way, this year is very good because of the efforts that we've done 12 months ago during that
And you were able to
tough time.
attribute the
Absolutely. That is just paying
but
because of the effort.
that's qualitative linking صح مش quantitative يعني مش لأنه it's not a cause and effect بالطريقة الملموسة. It's very subjective and people have to align to it بالطريقة هاي صح؟
Part of it is storytelling.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But that's where when I mentioned before, it's different layers of stories and everyone is able to tell their stories and you want those stories to be reinforcing each other in a positive way and so on. It's not about delusional sort of thing because it goes back in that same breath. You are actually showing the reds.
Yes,
you are saying last year wasn't a good year and we fall in this trap or we did this mistake and we've learned this lesson and here's what we're going to do together. And by the way, there is no guarantee that everything is going to be green again next year, but I'm hoping for less threats. I'm hoping that we will be operating at a very different, sophisticated level. I hope we will be raising the bar. At that level, we're going to be confronted with different constraints.
Yes.
And we're going to innovate around them.
And that's the key word.
And that's different constraints. We're going to
because if it's the same constraint, then you haven't done anything.
Absolutely, Osama. What you want is to start solving for better problems. You're gonna have other problems.
You want to have other problems.
You want to have other problems, and you want to have them as better problems than the problems you faced at that level. And you're gonna innovate around them again, and that's progress, and that's how you keep going.
طب حكينا عن leaders, and the example that you've just given is just profound, and I think. You're lucky. You're one of the lucky ones who were able to be part of that environment, of that story.
Absolutely.
لأنه it shaped, obviously it has an impact on you, on your philosophical worldview, on your paradigm. Obviously أي واحد بيشتغل معك will have this also. So this is some sort of a proliferation of the mindset of a true leader, of encouraging people to fail.
And puts responsibility on you and carrying it forward.
Of course. So others can learn from
you have absolutely, it puts a responsibility on you. It's like this is what you've received and this is what you need to go and propagate down as well in the organization. And as you grow, that continues to continue to hold those true,
And that leader was the architect of a culture that you immersed yourself in. يعني انت هاي الculture was not happening by accident. زي ما قلت, he knew exactly what he was talking about. لما كنت عم تحكي معه, he smiled in a way that he knew that هذا اللي هو الريزلت اللي كان بده يشوفه. It's not a green ولا yellow ولا, it's that is the result. It's your mindset and your reception to those difficulties that you were going through. And that was the important part for him. And that was a deliberate act of architecting a culture that you were immersed in.
Totally.
كيف ممكن الكل هيك يكون? How can every leader be like that? Because I think, and that's my anecdote, we're missing this at scale. Because it's very easier said than done.
It is. And I think, how can we...
Because it's all in the hands of leaders. Leaders
Correct,
and
maybe.
culture and two faces of the same coin. And they're the ones who are... if he didn't do what he did to you, if he, let's say, said, you know what, just take it like a man, or مش عارف, it is what it is, ولا ليه هيك عم بتقول, and he started being defensive, you'd be probably a different person, wouldn't you?
Totally.
So he architected a culture and then created that environment that made you embrace and كمان اتعلم الناس اللي معك, and then create that environment that is conducive for innovation.
Correct.
So it's that person.
Correct. And I think it's contagious, and probably this is where the answer to your question at the most basic level is that it's contagious. It's a positive feedback loop that encouraged me to add that same perspective and provide that same type of feedback, to subscribe to that same frequency, and to see the leaders that worked for me doing the same with their people, because the whole organization is actually tuned to that way of thinking, I think is what happens. I think there is also when I think about it bottom up, I think one thing that needs to happen is that you become less defensive about those failures, to take ownership of some of those, because I think if if someone goes to that leader and say, it didn't work, but you know what, it's because of this company is this and this company is that, and people are just I don't know what, and it's like then you are really trying to just come up with these excuses
victimhood
of any reason why this doesn't work. And the problem with it isn't that you are not even recognizing your responsibility in that. It's just that that mindset is not very is not very enabling of learning.
Yes,
When you tune that to that frequency, to that mindset, and probably we all have it in some element, and it pops its head every time and then about how everything is wrong and everything is the world is inadequate and you are the victim and all that. In that mindset, at that level, constructive learning is extremely difficult. So I think the answer to your question is that there is definitely a responsibility on top down that we propagate that same message and be able to take ownership of why am I doing this? Why am I defending not only the production, but the production capability down the road, and the institutionalization and the experimentation and the hypotheses and changing the job description so they are responsible for our immediate short-term success as well as longer-term capabilities of success and so on. But also there is an equal probably bottom-up sort of behavior that we also need to tune into that education or learning part of what's going around us, to be reflective in our feedback around that, in not being not fearing to project light both on when we won and when we learned. Someone says like you either win or you learn.
Yes.
Okay, and
it's a very beautiful worldview.
So when you put that as well, and that's I think it literally changed the frequency at which the discussion is, even with your upper management. When someone is coming with much less defensive view than the one they are used to, and saying we did well here, we were slow here, we didn't do well here, and you take ownership of all that. Okay, I think it's contagious as well upwards, not only downwards. I think there is probably that, and again, it does take two to tango. No one level can be in a very different, disconnected sort of behavior from the one above and the one below. But I think it is contagious. You need to.
I do agree, but not equally. Meaning
the distribution of responsibility.
I think it's 80-20, 80 with the leadership and 20 and the same. And the reason behind my claim is, let's say we have two organizations, Organization A and Organization B. Organization A has leadership that is empowering, that is trusting, that doesn't have failure, it's all learnings, that has a mindset of psychological safety. Come, please, and object. I encourage friction. في عندك debate holes. تعال, let's have the ideas in and let's debate those ideas in a civilized academic way. B is very much authoritarian, control, process-based. Everything has to go through the hierarchy. There's no empowerment. There is a lot of risk aversion. There's no trust. Trust is earned, not assumed. And then you have an employee that went from this organization, which was a superstar employee, and then went into this organization. How do you think this employee will behave in this organization?
No, it's definitely going to be difficult. It's and definitely that's what we call when we talk about cultural fit within corporations. But that employee is also a leader. So it's that's in large corporations, everyone has a boss, almost everyone.
True.
Okay, so when you are there is also that responsibility. It's like you said, it's 80%, but it's 80% downwards as well.
Yes.
Versus the 20%, there is 80% above you and 20%. So all I'm saying, it's not a cliche that everyone is a leader. You know, it's not a cliche. It's true.
It's
And
real.
then in corporate, it's almost like literally the case. So I think you know that just to balance the view that you talked about, it is definitely difficult, but and that's what the cultural fit is really about, and so on. All what I'm saying here is a thought. I think people who succeeded in large corporates needed to develop the skill of being able to create enough maneuvering space for themselves and their team to innovate and to experiment within otherwise a very demanding
or restrictive
can be restrictive organization. That's a skill, and that's a skill probably a different in when you bring people from who are operating in different it's a different muscle. So there are muscles that you probably develop more naturally if you are a startup or an entrepreneur, which probably someone like me, more of like a corporate person, wouldn't have developed equally. There are certain muscles I've developed, which is how do you, within such a very large and sometimes needed,
of course,
structure, constraints, still be able to maneuver and create that just enough maneuvering space to be able to move around and experiment and create a vision and strategy that is worthy for people to want to take part of, and tell a story. Tell a story in the middle of layers and layers of stories and strategy, and create that space for people to start doing great things. So that is a skill, and that's probably a very important skill for leaders and corporates, but that's a responsibility. That is a responsibility, and it is 80%, and then it becomes 20%. But your people as well are leaders,
100%.
And they are going to carry that
100%.
forward in their own create their own maneuvering space that you should allow. Sometimes it's really difficult. But you need to want to give them what you want to get.
The level of difficulty, in my mind, this is a thought, the level of difficulty is what defines a successful organization from otherwise not successful organization. What I mean by that is, if the concepts that you've discussed that makes an environment that is conducive of innovation, and then people are having this maneuvering space that is not too tiring, because remember, if you have to maneuver all the time, how much energy do you have to actually innovate? And that's sort of the balance, that you don't need to have 100% freedom, otherwise it will be chaotic. And at the same time, the more restrictive it is, it's good because it will develop this muscle, but then you'll be exercising it a lot, just maneuvering instead of, let's say, innovating.
Totally. So what you're talking about is fatigue.
Yes,
and that's very real.
Because if you keep on fighting,
that's very real. And as I said, yes, could it be easier? To your point, could the culture allow you to spend less time and energy having to maneuver around that? Absolutely, but
and that can be architected by the leader.
And absolutely, and there is endless into that, and I think that's what corporates really try to do. But they're confronted with very different constraints, very different
It's very
things.
complex.
It's very complicated. They're trying to weigh exactly the same things. But I'll tell you a thought about that as well. So I agree with you. Yes, it could structurally become less exhausting to try and exercise that muscle, but it's needed. It's needed. I mean, it's needed, and you are going to have to experiment with it to the extent. Part of what you mentioned, so when I moved into leadership positions, and then some of your own thoughts about what's going to be easy, what's going to be difficult.
Yes. Perception.
The perception.
Yes.
My first experience with that, and it's not like it's like more recent experience. I'm talking about like 10 years ago or 8 years ago or whatever. Was refreshing in the sense that you would think that what's going to challenge you are things that are more technical or more about the complexity and so on, and what's going probably to be easy are management aspects that you think you've mastered
over the years
and a long time ago. So
Yeah.
how, and I'm talking about some of the stuff that even that requires innovation and could go
So-
into philosophical discussions. And
Correct.
I'll give you an example
Yeah.
of this.
Yes,
Where do
please.
you never think that time management, which is very trivial sort of concept, is going to be really challenging, but you are going to have to master it at a very different level, especially
The
that
more
in
you grow in the
the more
hierarchy.
you grow, because the corporate is going to add an unbelievable
Yeah,
sort of overhead and requirements that you are going to have to juggle.
absolutely.
And that's part of just keeping the lights on. Of course, yes, someone needs to question them, someone needs to discuss the assumptions around them, but it's a fact that it's part of our corporate world today. The bigger the organization, maybe the older the organization it is. But that becomes a muscle that you need to train at a different level, and it's a skill that you need to master at a very different level. That's one. Another example is motivation. And
Yes.
it's not about motivating your people, it's about motivating yourself as well.
صح.
There will come days where you having the same level of energy and excitement can be challenging. You are now under the spotlight, and it sets the tone in the organization. You need to be careful about that, and you need to get that energy level back because you're responsible for others as well. That you are going to train that muscle at a very different level, because there is more and more that is coming that could get you on that roller coaster. How am I going to smooth
Normalize
those edges
yeah.
and normalize and make that healthy distance a little bit from all the stuff that is going around you? That's another sort of thing. So all what I'm saying, you have tools.
Which is emotional intelligence. As a leader, you're able to differentiate between the situation and yourself.
Correct. Absolutely. In that example that I've just described, absolutely. There are certain things about structure and organization skills that you need to train at a very different level if you want really the whole engine to work with less friction or less waste, or how do I drive consistency. There is a lot around communication.
Yes.
That North Star sort of thing. And how do you give that to the person on the ground, whether a leader or you are going to have to learn different skills. Because, so for example, you describe that culture in my interaction with that person, and that was very personal and very direct. But 99.5%, 99.9%, you're going to have to do that indirectly through layers of the organization. How are you going to influence so indirectly?
صح.
What tools of communication or skills that you need to train? Those muscles that you need to. All those are stuff that probably in a corporate world. I mean, by the way, some of the startups and the entrepreneurs face that. It's much easier to keep everyone inspired by that vision when it's a flat organization and small. And many of the entrepreneurs, as they grow, they how do I keep that fire going and that sense of mission with everyone? And then they are going to have to master that at a different level, learn different skills, train that muscle.
The academic inflection point is 13. So the moment you have 13 plus employees in your startup, this is where you have to pay close attention to your culture, because people start going into groups, and then you have lobbies, and then you have different types of interactions, and then communication becomes hierarchical.
And your bandwidth to spend directly with them to inspire them becomes very different. The chances are less, and so when you talk about hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of people, it's a very different
across geographies and across
geographies, across
and that's what
culture.
I mean by the 80% on leaders, because leaders. Someone like you who has a big geography, who has maybe in your career managed thousands of people, there is an element of you paying attention to this deliberately, I'm saying, rather than letting it happen. You see what you see as your close proximity, but then 2-3 layers down, it's outside of your sensory and receptors. You might have a perception, but reality might be different. And this is where the challenge for leaders are. And if you don't pay attention to it closely, and زي ما تفضلت, if you don't actually educate yourself, if you don't upskill your communication, your leadership, your people management, all of your structure, your hierarchy, كل هالكلام هذا within the organization, intentionally, outside of the numbers, outside of the technicalities, then things will not work well.
Absolutely, and spot on. And I think if that priority is present in your mind, because on that topic it's very important that the whole organization, all the layers are actually attuned to it, becomes very present in your mind. And what becomes interesting is that you start becoming more conscious and more aware of opportunities where you could go and exercise that priority or communicate that message to the extent, I mean, funny enough, it's like what and this is where you need sometimes to put your egos. Like people would saying, oh wow, we spent that time and there were a lot of storytelling, and what's going on is part you communicating your priorities and who you are and what you care about.
Yes.
And not only giving directions, or you are really trying to give the soft element of the message to be recognized. You are trying to give a sense of how you weigh priorities, the thinking process that you want others to consider at least.
Yes.
Okay. And you start also training, because a lot of the discussions is like, it isn't about telling. You start asking questions and you start asking questions and people start picking up that this is actually an important element. It's like why would the leader ask about those things, and have you tried this? And so if you know, and one of my managers actually very recently told me, every discussion with those people is actually training. It's also training. It's like the conversation that guy had with me. He knows that I'm also going to be interfacing with some of my own leaders in my organization, and they're not all going to be performing at the same level. And maybe one day I'll have to go and tell someone, I recognize the efforts that you're making. It was rough waters for you this year, but I want you to have one of these years.
I love it.
Okay, and so it is training, and it is going back to the concept of propagating. And I think yes, some leaders probably have it naturally. More they are storytellers. They want to be. They are more.
But it's expressive. A skill that can be acquired.
But it's absolutely a skill that can be acquired.
I love what you said. It's not about directing. It's about storytelling, and this rhymes with an idea in my mind. I've read it somewhere that true performance, is potential minus interference. And direction is interference. So if you want people to perform more to their true potential, then minimize interference. So minimize direction, tell them stories and let them go and realize their own potential. It's amazing.
Absolutely, which is again easier said than done when you are under the urgency of pressure, results and execution. So
which is the culture.
How do you resist the temptation of jumping in and doing it yourself and giving direction, which means it's going to maximize the chance of result, probably short term, but you lose such a valuable opportunity to educate and institutionalize capabilities. Again, going to back. So that's a balance that you definitely need to and yes, I think if you've worked with a team long enough and things aligned for you and something clicked and it was working, and there are people in my mind, they probably know who they are. It's like I would say, you know what I'm feeling at the moment, it's like the best thing I can do for you is to get out of your way.
Wow.
That's all because whatever I was hoping to happen is happening at a pace that I didn't imagine and I can't keep up with. And it's working, and there is a sense of spark and imagination, and it's producing beautiful results I couldn't have prescripted, I couldn't have described in that way, and it's working. And I'm really just nudging every now and then and just seeing whether they need something, and you feed that machine because it's producing beautifully. And they're creating their own story, which they are very proud of, and then you enjoy listening to this
Absolutely.
story that is emerging within the organization, and then you want more of those, and you know that everyone in your team have grown this segment from this to that. I refreshed the, I created such a well-trained caliber and team within the organization. I created a very innovative this. I transformed our ecosystem channel, and look how it's performing now. I broke through this, everything from I broke those to this account. I used this.
Yeah.
I produced a lot of thought leadership that gave us a seat at the table, and you're listening to all this, and there is a story that is shaping across all that, taking us this in direction, and has interesting twists to it, which makes it even more exciting. And I'm sure, my boss or my leader is looking at this as well. It's modular story, saying this is in this region where Shukri is leading. We've done this, and look at this in the context of a much bigger regional story, and this is what I've managed to do because I brought Shukri to do this. I brought someone else, his peer, to do that elsewhere, and so on. And that's when you I think start creating something really, really interesting and contagious. And
so fascinating.